In 1976, the bicentennial of the United States, Jimmy Carter easily defeated Gerald Ford. You can see the election map on the screen. Carter was relatively unknown as the governor of Georgia, but he represented a fresh face, an outsider to Washington after the years of Watergate and Vietnam. This was exactly what the public wanted. So Carter is elected as an outsider. Once he gets to Washington, being an outsider proves a difficult issue for his presidency. So once he's there, he finds it very difficult to get things done. Let's look at his administration a bit. When Carter comes to office, the economy was in a tough shape, and it's worsened by the energy crisis. OPEC is established by the oil-producing states in the Middle East, and they immediately move to restrict oil production and raise prices. This causes fuel shortages in the U.S. and gas lines. This is when gasoline first goes up to the huge price of $1 a gallon. Now, we have seen gas fall to about $1 a gallon in recent days, which for us seems like a great bargain. But the equivalent price for us would be around $5 a gallon. So you can imagine the pain this caused in the 1970s to the average consumer. It causes inflation to soar. It causes the price of everything to go up as it's connected to the price of fuel. So we're talking double-digit inflation, around 20%. We're talking interest rates that would also go up around 20%. And this is the cost of interest rates if you have good credit and you're buying a house or a car. So the economy suffers. You can see the consumer price index on this graph as it's affected by the price of oil. You can see it spike here as the energy price goes up. And the purple line that you see here is the rise in all prices as the price of energy rises. Conversely, in the 80s, that we tend to think of as good economic times, you can see the price of consumer goods will begin to fall, the price of all items, as energy falls dramatically in the 80s. So this falling energy prices in the 80s helps translate to what we think of as good economic times. In the 70s, Carter, of course, struggles with extremely bad economic times. So Carter tries to deal with the energy price, the energy crisis, by doing a number of things to try to save fuel. The speed limit is reduced to 55. Now we've gone back to, especially in states like Texas, to high speed limits, to 75, and even in places around Houston to higher limits, even up to 85 in some places. Also throughout the West. Fuel efficiency standards were set for automobiles. This is when we began to import smaller cars and smaller trucks like Datsuns, that are now Nissan brands. We began to set fuel standards like synthetic fuels, mixed fuels for the summer, and began to use natural gas. Because much of this is rooted in the Middle East, we began to pay attention to the Middle East in a way we had not for the most part, at least the public had not. Which brings us, of course, to the Middle East. It's a good time to look back at how we began to be entangled in the Middle East and in Middle Eastern policies back to the post-war years, post-World War II years. And this begins for the U.S. really with the creation of the modern state of Israel, which happens after the Holocaust. It's part of the UN, led by the U.S. President Truman is the first president to recognize the modern state of Israel. The United States is the first nation to do this. The result is a series of Arab-Israeli wars that continue to the modern era. President Eisenhower, who comes after Truman, of course, establishes a doctrine, the Eisenhower Doctrine, that relates to the Middle East. It's in three parts. One is to defend Israel. The second is to contain communism in the era of the Cold War. And the third, is to protect access to oil for the U.S. Now, with a little modification, you can see we still really basically have the Eisenhower Doctrine as our policy in the Mideast. It has certainly been a consistent policy of the U.S. to defend Israel's right to exist. After the end of the Cold War, we no longer have as a stated goal to contain communism, but certainly you could replace terrorism with communism as a goal to contain terrorism in the Middle East. And we certainly still have a goal to protect access to oil for the U.S. in the Middle East. So we still practice this Eisenhower Doctrine with the modification that I mentioned. Now, Carter, as a devout Protestant, a devout Christian Protestant, had as a stated goal to bring peace to the Middle East, a goal a number of presidents have attempted, of course, to accomplish. So he had this as a goal that he felt very strongly about and continues to in his post-presidency. So he worked very hard to try to begin the peace process. And he was successful at this with the Camp David Accords, the historic Camp David Accords, that he was able to help negotiate personally between Egypt and Israel, that did establish a historic framework for peace that's still in existence today. And so I see this map of the Middle East, modern map of the Middle East that's established really post-World War I, as we discussed when we talked about World War I. And you can see, of course, Iraq here, north of Saudi Arabia, that will become a hot spot during the Carter years. Because even though Carter is going to be successful in negotiations with Israel and Egypt, it is going to be, of course, Iraq that is going to be a real problem for the Carter administration and continues to be an issue today. And you see, of course, Iran next door. Iran and Iraq are almost constantly at war to the present. During the Carter years, you're going to be involved with Iran in the famous Iranian hostage crisis. And this short video from the History Channel really explains the background and the outcome of the Iranian hostage crisis. It's going to last through Carter's last year in office and ultimately going to ensure the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. So